Hi everybody, it's Ebony Love and I'm back with another video for the AccuQuilt Studio and Go die cutters. This is part 3 in a 3-part series on how to mark your dies for effective and efficient cutting. The first part in the series covered the tools that you need for marking your dies, as well as how to mark your strip dies for squares, strips, and diamonds. Part 2 covered geometric shapes and how to mark your dies that have multiple dies on them, or multiple shapes on them. Part 3 is going to cover the applique shapes, and as with the other 2 videos, the tips apply to both the Studio and Go cutters. So what I'm going to show you can be applied across, but there are a couple of things that you'll need to know that are specific to each cutter, and I'll demonstrate that today. So the first thing that I do when I get a die that I want to use is I mark the lines of the die shape. This is fairly easily accomplished with a Sharpie, as I demonstrated before on the first 2 videos. And what you do to mark the shape is you insert the tip of your Sharpie in between the foam and just drag it along the edge of the blade. This is pretty rough on the Sharpie, so you want to keep a couple of them on hand. When you have curved shapes, you want to go a little bit slower than you would on a straight edge blade, because you want to make sure that your Sharpie stays inserted into that blade. So you can see I kind of messed up a little bit on this one. So again, insert the tip of your marker inside the blade or inside the foam so that it's touching the blade, and then you can run your Sharpie right along that edge. These marking activities can sometimes be a little bit rough on a Sharpie marker, so if you keep a couple on hand, you can kind of alternate them and let the Sharpie recover from what you're doing. Now, one thing that I've noticed with the Go dies, and I don't know if you can see it very clearly on the video here, but I'll give you the tip and then you can just try it at home because I'm not sure that I can show it to you effectively here. But sometimes on the Go dies they're a little bit hard to see because the foam is just very tight against the die. So sometimes if you can see it, like for example on this one, I can see part of the edge of one of the stem shapes, but I can't see the entire thing. So what I do is if I what I found is that if I stand under a lamp, and I'm having some technical difficulties here, one second. This is where video editing skills would come in handy. I could edit this out and you would never know the difference. But what I found is that if I stand under a lamp or I angle the die under a lamp, I can actually see the lines better. And you might have to, you'll have to kind of find this for yourself. But as you work with the die, you'll find that if you find the right angle, you can see that line just kind of pop out right there for you. So again, the same thing, you insert the tip of your marker into that foam, and if you angle it, you might have to work a little bit to see the line clearly for yourself, but if you do that, you're able to see those shapes. So that's one tip. Another tip that I've shown just for the other shapes is to actually mark the shape with the size strip or square that you would need to cover it. So what you want to do is take a ruler and measure the shape. So once you have the shape drawn out, you can lay your ruler over it and see that, oh, this is a star. This star shape measures about 2 inches wide. So if I gave myself, say, a little bit of wiggle room, I need to cut a square of fabric that's 2.5 inches wide in order to cover that shape. So that's what I do with these particular dies. Again, and this works on both the Studio and the Studio and the Go dies. So again, line it up. Look at how big your shape is. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. So this shape measures 4.5 inches approximately. So if I cut a square at 5 inches, and again, I'm just writing this directly on the die. So if I cut a shape at 5 inches, I know that size square is going to cover this. For the applique shapes, for most of them, because I use fusibles for the most part, I don't mark registration marks or grain lines. Even if you don't use a fusible, with the applique shapes, if they have a lot of curves and different angles on them, if you're doing needle turn applique or you're stitching them down, or raw edge applique, the grain of the fabric doesn't really come into play very much. You'll just want to be careful as you apply it if you're not using fusible so that the shapes stay attached. So typically on the applique dies, again, I don't draw registration marks on those to align the shapes. I just say this is the size square that will cover the shape. If it's a rectangular shape, then I'll write both of those dimensions. So these are round shapes in particular, but if I took this stem as another example, and I don't have the stem fully outlined, but if I took that stem, it looks like the stem is about 6 inches long, and the entire curve, to cover the entire curve, is about 1.25 inches. So for this one, if I said, if I cut a strip that's 6 inches long by 1.5 inches wide, then that will cover the stem. And you can see my this particular Sharpie has just about had it from a marking perspective, at least with this session. But again, if I just mark that shape, that'll tell me that if I cut a strip or I have a piece of fabric that's 6.5 inches long and 1.5 inches wide, then that will cover the shape. Now I know that the 1.5 inches wide does not give me a full 1/2 inch like I'm used to using, but with this shape, if I place it carefully, then I'll be able to cut this shape. So again, just to recap, outline your shapes first. Figure out what size square or rectangle will cover that shape and write that right on the die next to the shape or inside the shape. For dies with multiple dies on them or multiple shapes on them, if the blades are hard to see or the cuts in the foam are hard to see, angle them under a lamp so you can see them better. And for rectangular shapes, just write both dimensions and give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. So I hope that this series of videos has been really helpful to you. I really enjoy cutting with my AccuQuilt Studio and Go cutters, both of them, and I hope you have fun quilting. Thanks.